Okay, so first question for today is going to be most of the rabbis who discuss the idea about Jesus being in the Talmud dismiss it as not being the same Jesus of the New Testament, but there are some who actually say that they believe that it actually is the Jesus of the New Testament that's mentioned in the Talmud. In fact, and there's even word that they know for a fact this person died and actually was buried, not resurrected. So we would like to have your thoughts on this topic, if you don't mind.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Question is, how much time do you spend on it? So the question is the Jesus of Christianity in the Talmud? And people go, what do you mean? Is like another Jesus, like who plays plays shortstop for the Yankees? That's not what it's important to understand. There are the name Yehoshua or Yeshua or Yeshu. These are truncated. That would be the equivalent today of Josh. Of course, you will find that all over our sacred literature, not just in the Talmud. You'll find it in the Tanakh itself. Many, many people with this name. There's Yeshua, who was a high priest, who was the nephew of Ezra. He was the son of Yehoshua ben Yehotzadok. Yehotzadok was Ezra's younger brother. So people go, oh, it's Yeshu, or there's Jesus. So I think in Josephus it's like 27 people with that name. So this is a very common name. So this makes it very complicated. But it should be said that there are two notable characters discussed in Talmudic literature that that Christians are usually referring to. And it's not for good reason. They're referring to it because they're saying that it's not just that Jesus is mentioned in Talmud, because these two individuals or this individual who's mentioned in the Talmud, we find in different places, whether in Tractate Gittin or Tractate Sanhedrin, there's nothing nice about this individual. There's nothing complimentary. That means if that is in fact the Jesus of Christianity, that would not only not support or give credibility to the claims of the church, it would diminish from it. As it turns out, the Yeshu that we find in the Talmud are lived in two different periods. So there's one person who we are very familiar with, who lived during the time of Yeshua ben Parachia. For many people going, well, who's that? Rabbi Yeshua ben Parachia is a very famous Tana. A Tana is an author of the Mishnah. That means these are the earliest rabbis who are from the earliest era who are recorded in the Talmud. Although you look up the Talmud and it'll tell you the Talmud was finally edited and completed. It's important to give dates here in, let's say, the year 500, or I would probably say 530. But it's a record of what was said by sages going back all the way to 200 BCE. Okay? And when we talk about the date of 500 CE, we're talking about when it was finally edited, the Babylonian Talmud, that is, and completed. This is the largest document of antiquity by far. It's enormous, over 6,500 pages. I mean, just huge. So stepping back, the Talmud, we use the Babylonian Talmud is divided into two parts. One is called the Mishnah, and the Mishnah are the writings of sages, of rabbis, who lived roughly as early as the time of the Maccabean period, let's say 150, 200 BCE. There are such individuals, going all the way to the time of 200 CE. That's the time of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Judah the prince, who is affectionately known as Rebbe. And these were the very great sages who wrote the Mishnah and were writing in Hebrew. So there is an early Tana, they're called Tanoim, this segment of this period of time, who lived 100 BCE. And he had to deal with a student who deviated away from the Jewish faith. He made unpleasant remarks about it's not really germane to the show, but made a striking remark about a woman who apparently had eyes that were not attractive, and his teacher thought this was an extremely inappropriate thing for a rabbi, a comment to make about a woman's physical features, and dismissed him, and it didn't work out well at all. The point of that story, that this student then went to Egypt, engaged in forms of witchcraft, and then came back to ask his Rebbe for forgiveness, and regretted his behavior. I'm truncating the story because I want to just get to its point. And the Rebbe at the time was reciting the Kriya Shema, the Shema Yisrael, Deuteronomy 6:4, the most important creed of the Jewish faith. And when reciting this creed of our people, that's in the forefront of our mind at all time, we're not allowed to stop and just engage in conversation with anyone. So when his student came to repent, he went like this. The student misapprehended that wave and thought, my teacher doesn't want anything to do with me. He left and rebelled bad. He went in a very bad direction. And why would the Talmud record such a story? Like, how does that make it to sacred literature? The Talmud is trying to convey the fact that a teacher, when dealing with a student, even if that student goes off the derech, means off the proper path, you should maybe, obviously, you have Leviticus 19, that you have to rebuke your student or rebuke your friend, but you should push away with the left, but bring students who are troubled in with the right. So it's a very important text, not for the point of he ran off. The point of it all is that it's instructions for teachers, for rabbis, that you should show more affection. Even if you criticize your student, criticize with the left hand, but draw them in with the right hand, both. Now, the point is that this can't be the Jesus of Christianity, because the Jesus of Christianity, we are told by Christians, was born, depending on which gospel you read. According to Matthew, Jesus was born while Herod the Great is still alive. They were contemporaries. Herod the Great, we know, died in 4 BCE. According to Matthew's infancy narrative, Jesus was born around 6 BC, because it's not germane, but he would have been as much as 2 years old at the time that Herod died. So therefore, according to Matthew, Jesus is born, 6 BCE. It's way too late. It can't be the same guy. Luke identifies Jesus' birth with a census of the Roman Empire, which Jews, we are told, had to go back to their ancestral city. Not just Jews, but members of the Roman Empire, which, incidentally, never happened. It is bogus, but the key is it's the same time when Herod Archelaus, the son of Herod the Great, who was crazier than his father, was removed from power, and the governor of Syria, Quirinius, was brought in his stead. That we know when that happened. That was a historical event. That happened in 6 CE. Luke identifies Jesus' birth with the governor of Syria taking over Judea. Okay? So therefore, Matthew and Luke are apart, let's say, a little more than a decade on when exactly Jesus was born. It's not, but certainly it can't be that 100 BC. That doesn't work. Then we have other texts about another person. Again, today Jews do not call themselves Yeshu. They don't call the kids Yeshu because the name became associated with something very negative in Jewish history. There was another Yeshu where we have placed in the Talmud identified. That was in time of Rabbi Akiva, which means 2nd century. That means 100 years after the fact. Because again, Christians are dating Jesus to be been crucified about 33. For what reasons? It's basically because of John's a 3-year ministry versus the synoptics. Let's say he was crucified near 30. as a general. So nothing fits. So the argument is, to Jews, is preposterous, because if in fact the Talmud is discussing the Jesus of Christianity, if it's the same person, and again, this is a very common name, this is not the kind of thing you'd want to use in order to lend credibility to the claims of the church, because these individuals are people who are not our best Jews. So I don't know why they do this today. Now, in the old days, meaning in the 13th century, when someone like Nicholas Donin, an apostate Jew from Paris, and he had it in for the Jews, and he sought out and gained a meeting with the Pope at the time, Pope Gregory, and which led to the burning of the Talmud. His point was the Talmud's evil, and worse, it speaks blasphemous of Jesus and Mary and all these other things. So their purpose was to destroy the Talmud. So that made sense. But today evangelicals are not, we are told, engaging in this kind of stuff. So first off, the Jesus we find in the Talmud is, the Talmud is this enormous a document of more than 70 volumes. It's so large it takes 7.5 years to go through it all, folio by folio, which thousands of Jews do worldwide. But the Jesus they are pointed to are not the same people. I'm going to, full disclosure, are not the Jesus of Christianity, because chronologically it doesn't work. Let alone the stories there do not match the Gospels at all. So Christians who would point to the Talmud, I would say you can do a lot better. Not that I'm going to tell Christians how to sell their religion, but this is a disaster, because you're then saying this person can't be the Messiah. One thing you can be sure of, not one person with that name in Talmudic literature says I'm the Messiah. None of them do. So therefore, it's a very foolish thing. It is a good thing to do if you're David Duke. And David Duke, who's a notorious anti-Semite member of the Ku Klux Klan, he's running for some sort of office, I guess, in Louisiana. He would do this because he wants people to hate Jews, and he's a noted anti-Semite. So of course he will exploit these texts, say, see what the Jews say about Jesus, as though the New Testament doesn't say the most horrible things about Jews. So that doesn't work either. Okay, so his point, the anti-Semite point of bringing up the Talmud, is the Talmud says bad things about Jesus, therefore the Talmud is evil, because it's not nice to say bad things about somebody else's religion. Well, if we're to apply that principle in the other direction, whoa, you got, John 8:44, the Jews are the seed of the devil. I mean, the Christian Bible is pregnant with highly uncomplimentary statements about the Jews. Now, and don't come back and say, well, the Jewish Bible has uncomplimentary things about the Jews, because that doesn't work. In the Jewish Bible, the prophets are speaking to the Jews and saying, you're behaving terribly. So that's one thing to say to someone, say to your own kid, to criticize them. But if I say to you, you know what the Chinese did, or you know what the black people did, you know what the yellow people did, and I'm talking to someone who's not their race, that means I'm a racist. I'm not trying to make them better. It's not like a black father is talking to his child. He's saying, this is not the way a young black man acts. But if I say, you know how black men is, then I'm the biggest racist I've walked in 2 feet. So therefore, the whole thing is fatuous, it's silly. Yes, it's for hate mongers, absolutely. But if Christians really think that we have preserved in the Talmud a record of the Jesus of Christianity, they have then made it impossible for Jesus to be the Messiah. So that's a huge mistake. And I say this to the listeners, always look it up for yourself. But the case has been argued in 1242 in France before I nearly said St. Louis the Ninth. He was made a saint. All right, before the city of St. Louis is named after him. That's on Interstate 70. Who was a devout Christian. They burnt every Talmud in France in 1242 based on these very serious charges. I want to make one last point. Through over the centuries, Christian anti-Semites, which for a very long time was a redundant to say that. So we had many such characters like that. You had Nicholas Donnan. I write about this in a very large chapter in Volume 1. You have Pablo Cristiani. You have Raymond Martini. We have these guys, these characters today who are of Jewish extraction and the biggest enemies of the Jews. We had a guy named Pfefferkorn who lived 500 years ago, who lived in the early 16th century, this is a Jew who converted. And like today, you see some of these characters who become the biggest enemies of the Jews. He started saying that the Jews did all these terrible things, were hiding things, and he generated a tremendous amount of anti-Semitism. And strangely, I want to tell you this is one of the why I cover this extensively. I'm not trying to sell books, but I cover this extensively. As it turns out, the charges of Pfefferkorn in the early 16th century was so egregious and so dangerous, the charge was so great, that the Jews went to the church and said, enough is enough. And at the time, there was a very well-known scholar whose name is Johannes Ruchlin, who's a genius, absolutely. He's a Christian, devout Christian, technically Catholic. Most people think he was a closet Protestant. He was a Hebraist par excellence. And he was given the task by the church. This is one of the wildest stories, and we'll close it with this. So this Gentile, pure non-Jew, who is a genuine Hebraist, I mean, first-class Hebrew speaker. He even wrote a commentary on a Jewish commentary. He's way over the top. So Ruchlin is given the task by the church to investigate whether the Talmud contains any blasphemy against Jesus, anything horrible about Jesus or Mary. Okay, and he was really one of the great luminaries of the church of the 16th century, giant. He's famous for providing Erasmus with manuscripts to publish the First and New Testament. Anyways, he goes through all of Talmudic literature and other literature, and he says, look, there's some weird little booklets running around that, some angry Jew after the Crusades made up, and no Jew takes them seriously. Yeah, of course there are, even after a crusade. But he said, the Talmud actually, there's nothing like this. The charges of this apostate Jew is completely fatuous, is untrue entirely. And not only that, I'm calling for that there should be an additional 2 seats created at universities in Germany for the study of the Hebrew language. And so here, a hero of the Jewish people emerges in the form of a Christian who defends the Jewish people. This is Ruchlin, an intriguing person. Pfefferkorn is the apostate Jew. He's the Jews for Jesus guy. He's the guy running around telling the Jews this and this. And they fight with each other. So you have the guy who's born Christian and the apostate Jew. And the Gentile Christian is the one who stands up for the Jewish people. And he was very successful in this. They battle each other back and forth. And to this day, I'll end with this, that the most egregious, the most toxic, the most like UNESCO, the vote that won last week, the most offensive things about the Jews that are made by Christians today are not made by Gentiles. They're made by people who are born of Jewish extraction. They feel because their great-grandmother or their mother was Jewish, therefore they have a license to say things about Jews that non-Jews feel uncomfortable because they don't want to be accused of anti-Semitism. And it's just today. Today there are statements made by chosen people ministries that we hide Isaiah 53. Non-Jews would never do that. They not only wouldn't do it because just practically it would be offensive. The most anti-Jewish missionaries out there that I encounter who will say the rabbis are in a conspiracy, they're Jews. The Gentiles that I find in Prestonwood Baptist Church in Dallas, generally, my experience is they're very nice people. And so as it turns out in history, there was a Christian who did stand up for the Jewish people, and there was an apostate Jew who would use this material. But frankly, the statement that Jesus mentioned in Talmud is almost certainly not correct. It was proven during the court case of 1242. It was a kangaroo court. The Jews who defended the Talmud could not be successful under those conditions. But if you want to say that it really was the Jesus of Christianity, now you have a bigger problem than you ever had, because now you're saying that the Jesus of Christianity was this very horrible character. We're saying it's not. You understand? We're saying it's not the Jews, and it's not the Jews of Christianity, and you could see it because of the people who surrounded it. It historically doesn't work. Should I put a footnote here? There are mythicists. This is very interesting. This is the twist. There are mythicists, and these are people who say that Jesus never existed. Okay, these are mythicists who say that, this is really what it's about. There is no such person as Jesus historically. This is a mythicist position. It's not my position. It's not a Jewish position. They say there's no Jesus. And to prove it, we don't even have a Jesus of the first century. And what they did was they took Jesus from other periods and then conflated them to produce the character you see today. But in fact, it's not just a sophomoric argument. It's the silliest argument you can make as a Christian in order to bolster the notion that Jesus is the Messiah. If that's him, then he can't possibly be the Messiah. Case closed.
אדון עולם אשר מלך בטרם כל יציר נברא ועת נעשה בחפצו כל אזי מלך